I'd like to call this meeting March 16th of the City of Williamsburg Planning Commission to order. Ms. Murphy, if you'd call the roll, please.
Mr. Sharler?
Present.
Mr. Edwards?
Present.
Mr. Klee?
Here.
Mr. Farakas?
Here.
Ms. Stafford?
Here.
Ms. Macbeth?
Here.
Mr. Julian?
Here.
The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of February 17th, 2016. Any commissioners have any additions, deletions, modifications?
No. I move that we approve the February 17th minutes as presented to us.
Second.
Ms. Murphy?
Mr. Sharler?
Abstain.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Mr. Farakas?
Aye.
Ms. Stafford?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Julian?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to consent agenda. We have nothing on the consent agenda. Public hearings, PCR 16-003, approval of the Port Ann Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, and waiving certain ongoing requirements of the development plan. Reed?
I'm going to present this one.
Chris, okay. Excuse me.
We received a request from Port Ann to review and present to council their amended declaration and restrictive covenants. And the staff has reviewed those and found those to be acceptable and consistent with the development plan. And so staff recommends that those be approved. However, when we were looking at the zoning ordinance and the plan, there are two provisions that the staff is requesting and recommending that the Planning Commission recommend to council that be waived in future. And the first is that the development plan requires that the restrictive covenants be reviewed and approved by council. And the second is that there be included in the restrictive covenants a requirement that the city be permitted to enforce those restrictive covenants. That is not typically what we do. 30 years ago, apparently it was deemed appropriate, but we have never exercised that right and would likely not choose to exercise that right in the future. The development has been there for 30 years. It's fully developed at this point. The staff believes that the zoning ordinance and the development plan that exists is adequate to protect the city's interest. The restrictive covenants constitute a contract between the neighborhood and the owners of the property in the neighborhood, and the city staff feels that it's not appropriate for the city to be in the middle of that contract. And so before you is an ordinance that does three things. One is to approve the submitted amended covenants. The second is to waive the requirement that City Council approve future incarnations of the restrictive covenants. And finally, that the requirement that the city be allowed to enforce the restrictive covenants also be waived. The zoning ordinance that applies to this particular neighborhood is from the 1980s. It was subsequently changed in 1991, so this is a holdover from old zoning, which will still apply to Port Ann. These are the only two provisions that we're requesting be waived at this point is the future review requirement and the enforcement requirement. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Before the commission gets into discussion, I'd just like to disclose that the applicant's attorney, Susan Tarley, also serves as my attorney, but I don't feel that's a conflict of interest for me to be able to make a decision on this matter. Any questions of Chris? Ms. Tarley, would you like to come address the commission? Sir, we'll open the public hearing in a minute, sir, and you'll be able to speak.
Good afternoon, Mr. Flarakis and commission members. I represent Port Ann Owners Association. My name is Susan Tarley, and I practice with the law firm of Tarley Robinson here in Williamsburg. And I don't really have anything to add, but wanted to let you know that I'm here to answer any questions. We did put this out to vote for the Owners Association. It was in the fall of last year. We did get approval, so we had 81 approve it. We had 8 against it, and it passed with a 72.9% of the vote in the association, and the requirement was that we get 2/3. So the owners have already approved it, so we're waiting on this, and once we have that, then we'll be able to record the new document. And I don't know if you have any questions for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tarley. Okay, now I'd like to open the public hearing. If anyone would like to come speak, please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Ernst Palmer. I live in Port Ann at 32 Frenchman's Key. I heard what Ms. Charlie said. We did vote to review the covenants. Now, we have not, as a homeowner, I've not seen any results of that review. And I just found out about this by reading the Gazette this morning. I don't know what all this implies. I'm trying to understand as a homeowner. Is this just where the city will no longer be involved, or is this going to allow the the board to make just changes to the homeowner guidelines, the architectural review guidelines, and things like that? I think these are questions that I know some of the other homeowners have called and spoken with me, and they're concerned that we're all sort of surprised by this. I would appreciate if we could delay this and have the board explain to the homeowners association exactly what all this entails, and make sure that all the homeowners are aware of what's happening before we take action. That's all I'm asking.
Chris, could you maybe elaborate on exactly the piece that we're removing really doesn't affect
Sure.
property?
The restrictive covenants are an agreement between the homeowners association in Port Ann and the property owners in Port Ann. The only thing that the city is doing in this instance is currently under the zoning that exists for the property, the city has to review and approve any amendments to the restrictive covenants. The city's review for that purpose is only to ensure that they are consistent with the zoning ordinance and that the city's current existing easements remain in place.
Okay.
The other two things that we are requesting to do is to cease the process of City Council reviewing the Homeowners Association amendments in the future. They will still have to comply with the zoning ordinance. Any amendments in the future still have to comply with the zoning ordinance. The other thing that we're asking for Council to waive is the obligation or ability of the city to enforce the restrictive covenants. It is the staff's opinion that that is a contractual obligation between the homeowners and the Homeowners Association, and that's a private contract the city should not be enforcing.
Okay. I guess this.
Ms. Tarley, you said that all the homeowners were asked to vote on the issue and informed?
There was a notice that was put out, there was a meeting that was held, ballots were submitted, and for the documents, once that approval was granted by the homeowners, then we came to the city to request approval of the document. So the document still contains all of the requirements that the city had in terms of some of the architectural requirements. None of that has changed. The only thing that we're actually requesting that Planning Commission do is to approve what we want to make these changes, and that they are consistent with what the city wants, which is why we have the ordinance now, or the proposed ordinance, to, one, take away the city having to approve things in the future, and then two, the city enforcing things. It's not something that we use ever in any other jurisdiction in terms of a city or county enforcing covenants. Usually that is, the covenant enforcement comes from the owners or the association, or if you have a developer still involved. So it's very rare to have that, but I think at the time when Port Ann was done, they felt they needed that mechanism to make sure that the requirements of the planned unit development ordinance were followed.
Thank you, Ms. Tarley. Mr. Palmer, does that help your
If
answer
that's
your
all that's
question?
involved, I apologize for taking your time. I will go back and talk to our board. I'm sort of appalled at their lack of transparency in keeping homeowners informed. It would have been nice had we known that they were coming down here. I hate to find these things out in the Gazette.
I can understand that. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Palmer.
very much for your time.
Yes, ma'am.
Party.
Okay.
My name is Barbara Vollmer.
The better half.
I've been the architectural chair on several occasions. So could you clarify that you are, in the second part, adding, not taking away the enforcement of the footprint requirement in some of those?
Nothing in the development plan is being waived except for the review of the restrictive covenants by council and the city's enforcement of the restrictive covenants. The city will still enforce the zoning ordinance.
And that's a zoning, that falls under zoning. So if someone is planning construction and they come up with a house, normally say the footprint requirement is 2,500 square feet and they want to build 3,000 square feet, who's going to enforce that?
The city enforces that. That is a part of the zoning
Okay.
restrictions on Port Ann.
I just wanted to clarify that because that's a big issue with these very small lots.
Yes,
And
that will
sometimes,
continue.
and oftentimes happens, people have bigger plans. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because like my husband said, we were very surprised to see it in the Gazette and not have heard it from our homeowners. So we apologize, but
Oh, no
we
apology
do appreciate
necessary.
the clarification.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Ms. Palmer. Would anyone else like to come forward and speak to this matter? Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing and come back to commission for comments.
I think it's sensible to make this more in line with the way we treat we now have other planned unit developments, correct, in the city. Just put this more in line with the way we treat other communities. There's no reason to single Port Ann out.
Right. Oh, no, I totally agree. I'm sorry that they left, because I guess I had wanted to just clarify for their edification that, I mean, the parts of Port Ann that's covered by ARB, they're still covered by ARB. All those things are there.
Nothing is being waived except
Right.
those things that I have
Right.
said.
Right. So none of those concerns, and the fact that because this was our first planned development, we had this, restriction that the city was going to engage in,
She must have heard you. She's back.
Okay. That's a private party matter. So all that is, I totally support this. I'm glad that they heard it. I guess in our new building there must be speakers in the lobby, so you can leave and still hear the meeting. So I have no quarrels on this.
Anyone else?
I have a question for Ms. Tarley, if I could, just to help me understand. Why would homeowners vote against this? Am I missing something?
I don't know why they would vote against it. None of them gave their reason for voting against it. We oftentimes get people who do not participate, and so in one respect that counts as a no vote, but we had some who voted against it. I do know that they had some concerns in the community about how long they were going to permit RV vehicles to be parked overnight at a property. Sometimes it can be something that seems small, but it means something to that person, so they vote against the entire amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Comments? Questions?
Very straightforward.
I move we approve PCR 16-003 as submitted.
Second.
Murphy?
Mr. Sharler?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Mr. Florакis?
Aye.
Ms. Stafford?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Julian?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to our open forum. If anyone would like to address the commission on any item that we have purview over, please come forward now and state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, close the open forum. We have nothing today under site plans and subdivisions. No unfinished business. Any new business?
I have one item, just an informational item, and I'll put the link up on the screen. As part of our downtown parking study, we have an online survey that was made live on Monday. You can participate in the online survey through the end of this month, March 31st, and it's on the screen. You can just go to the city's webpage at williamsburgva.gov, and there's a link on the home page to the downtown parking study. There's also to the survey. There's also other information available on the downtown parking survey. Since the survey's been live, we've had over 900 responses to the survey so far, so we're
Wonderful.
Very pleased with that response rate.
I'm one of them.
Me
Thank
too.
you, Reed. I haven't done mine yet.
Oh, you need to get on that.
I will. Okay, next item, under other business. Lane?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to offer another piece of business based on some discussion that we were having as we were gathering before we started. With regard to the James Blair Middle School site. To refresh our memories, on December 16th, 2015, we approved PCR 15-026, which is a special use permit to demolish the existing James Blair and to construct a new middle school in 2 phases. That passed unanimously through Planning Commission, and I just wanted to reaffirm our support of this location and timing as presented to us throughout the fall in working on this special use permit that we approved in December. I would offer that as a motion for affirmation.
Second.
Ms. Murphy, you call the roll.
Mr. Schaller?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Mr. Farrakis?
Aye.
Ms. Stafford?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Julian?
Aye.
Okay, under information items, we have the City Council report, our monthly departmental report, and the monthly financial statement. Any questions on informational items? No? For April 20th, we have no public hearings scheduled. So I assume, Reed, that we might not have a meeting then?
We are anticipating that there will be one site plan to review at the meeting.
Wonderful. All right, with that, I close the meeting.